Well, am I ever excited for today's session? I'm starting a brand new mix project where I'm mixing an album for a client that I've worked with for almost 20 years. And this is an important session that I want to share because in so many of the past sessions that I've shared on the channel, I've talked about and demonstrated my willingness to go into people's music and get heavy-handed, so to speak, as a producer, where I'm prepared to go into that person's track or that band's song and fix or replace whatever I have to make that a killer mix. Well, the majority of clients that I work with, they expect that from me. They absolutely want me to dig into their track and produce it, to take that track and sort of step it up to the next level. Well, equally important is a group of clients that I work with that hire me for the reason that they know I'm not going to do that. Well, this new mix project is an industrial noise grind band from back east. And like a lot of bands, these guys are so serious about their craft. The emails that I got in preparation for this session were so detailed. When somebody goes to the effort of writing me a short novel before I start mixing their record, when they give me the individual details and breakdown of every single track and the overall recording method, what mics they used, what preamps, where those mics were located on the drum kit, that on top of the genre of music that they're playing in, dictates to me as a producer that, I can't follow that regular line of production. There's no way that I can go into this dark metal track and just start replacing everything. I'm going to have to step up to the plate as a producer and as an engineer. I'm literally going to have to pull out every trick I know in the book to have these mixes come across as big and bold as I possibly can without plastering a bunch of samples on them. Yeah, in my own experience, there's just certain genres of music that don't want to be overproduced. And this dark metal industrial noise grind band is one of those bands. It's just so important as a producer to recognize when you're working with one of these bands where they've got a real hardcore underground scene that would not put up with any kind of overproduction nonsense. Yeah, if I go in and start overproducing these tracks, almost certainly that band's fan base is going to absolutely freak out in a bad way. They're going to have a very negative reaction to hearing a bunch of weird samples and triggers going on in a style and genre of music that they're expecting everything to be real, off the floor. So as much as I love being a heavy-handed producer on certain projects, there are all kinds of clients that come to me because they know that I'm not going to do that I'm going to stay true to that genre. And so for today's session, I want to share exactly how I like to put a mix project like this together, because it's a very different process than what I get up to traditionally. So let's get into it. Well, this client has sent me the multi-track files for all 12 songs in different deliveries or folders. Well, probably like many of you, I would normally open up each one of those songs in an individual and unique session to that song. Well, with a band like this, where they're actually recording all of the drums in the same room with the same mics and stuff, I want all of those song files in one big session. I absolutely don't want to create an individual session for each one of those tracks. This is not a complicated recording. We're talking about maybe 12 stereo tracks making up this mix or something. Well, you can see that I've started to assemble my mix here. I've got the first 5 songs loaded in. So to import the next multi-track on my timeline, I literally just pick a new start point. I can see the previous track ends at bar 593, so just gonna pick 609 to be my new start. Okay, so the tempo's 88 BPM. So I just go to my new start point and I enter a tempo change in at bar 609. Yeah, these tracks were all captured off the floor by a real band playing live, so it's not going to necessarily line up to a grid. And the tempos are really just there as a point of reference for me. Okay, so I've got a starting bar number that we're going to drop this next multi-track in, and I've entered the tempo reference. Only thing left to do is import the audio tracks. I'll select all the multi-track files and copy them into my new folder. Yeah, that last step was very important. The fact that I copied all of those files into my new session. I use my own kind of custom file management system. And one thing that I love to do is I like to leave the original files that I get from my client for whatever mix I'm doing in a separate folder where I leave those intact. I don't ever mess with them. So the last step that I just did is very important. When I'm building a multi-track session, whether it be an individual session for a track or for a whole album like I'm doing here, where I'm putting multiple multi-tracks in, I copy those files into my new session so that I'm actually working on a copy of all those files. Then no matter what happens to the session that I'm working on, I can always go back and reference the original files without having to reach back to the client, right? That's the last thing you want to do, or have to download them all again or something. I've always been a fan of following that protocol. Next, I just have to decide on how Pro Tools is going to import those files and where they're going to put them. What I typically do is I just drop them into a new set of tracks at the selection that I'm at. So I'll go ahead and do that now. So boom, there's our new multi-track starting at the bar number that we had selected, right? Well, now because this session is so simple, all I do is quickly just line up the tracks again. I just simply move everything around. You know, there's a fancier way, of course, that I can do that import where Pro Tools will line everything up where it's supposed to be, but it's only a few tracks. It only takes a second for me to drag them around. All right, so I've got the first 6 multi-tracks loaded into this session, and first thing I notice when I zoom out and I look at all 6 of those multi-tracks is that I can see that there's level differences in those recordings. Just like I mentioned earlier, you know, the band recorded these tracks in some cases months apart, so I certainly don't expect the engineer match levels. You know, in my own experience, when I'm recording like a 4-piece band live off the floor in the studio, yeah, I'm not paying that much attention to the little details of level. I'm just praying that I get that recording captured perfectly with no crappy mics or bad cables or something like that showing up in the middle of the recording. So yeah, when I look at the first 6 multi-tracks, I can tell that I'm going to have to go in there and do some doctoring in between those tracks. But this is exactly how you want to be set up. You know, you definitely don't want to have 12 tracks opening up as separate sessions when you're trying to level match and stuff. When you have a simple multi-track recording like I've got in front of me, and you've got it all laid out in one big session, you can imagine that it makes the mix so much easier because you can literally jump around. And that's exactly what I end up doing. I mean, a lot of times when I'm mixing a project like this, I just end up mixing sort of the whole album all at the same time. Absolutely my preferred method to set this style mix up. But of course, you're gonna have to have a computer that can handle it, right? You know, by the time I'm done this mix, I'm gonna have a ton of signal routing and processing going on. Some of it's gonna be shared, some of it's gonna be separate. But I promise you, it'll be a fairly complex session by the time I'm done. Yeah, this is an awesome system to use, but it's definitely going to use a lot of resources on your computer, and you just got to make sure that you've got the horsepower to keep up to it. Well, this might come as a bit of a surprise to many of you, but I've always found that a band like this, some of the simpler recordings like we're talking about, are some of the hardest to get the mix right. I don't know what it is. Like an industrial electronic track, I can have like 130 tracks rolling and all this chaos, and I've got a clear path in how to get to the end of that mix. But very often when I put up like a 3-piece punk band or a 4-piece metal band that's played live off the floor, and I've got that recording, yeah, I find those recordings some of the hardest mixes to get right. So I'm gonna have to put my engineering hat on, like I talked about earlier, roll up the sleeves and get busy on this thing because I got some work in front of me. I want this project to sound huge, and it will, but it's going to take some work and some effort. And I always love this challenge. You know, how do you transform that recording into something magical, huge, epic, and true to the genre? Well, thank you very much for sitting in on today's session. I'm definitely going to be sharing some of this project, but only when it's got the hiwatt stamp of approval. So until then, stay safe.